Hi, Todd Dunn here on January 4, 2019. This is the second video in my automotive video series. Today, I want to talk about something a little different. I want to talk about electric cars. In particular, I'd like to look at the question, does an electric car make sense in 2019? So, let's get going and look at some of the things that I think are important considerations for electric cars. I'm not going to look at range, efficiency, reliability, because I think a lot of other people have done those videos. Instead, I'm going to look at something that's a little closer to home for most of us. Cost. How much does an electric car cost, and does it make financial sense? And I'm going to look at some of the factors that go into that. In order to do that, I need to pick a particular electric car that has a gasoline equivalent. So I'm also going to consider perhaps what the target market for a lot of electric cars is. People like me, older people in their late 60s, early 70s, probably are not the prime market for electric cars. Old guys like me mostly drive Buicks, or they used to anyway. I don't think you can buy a Buick anymore. So anyway, we're probably not the target market, although I personally did consider buying an electric car when I was looking for a car in November. I'm going to consider a hypothetical sort of youngish couple that is a median couple. They live in a median cost city. They have a median income, which in the United States right now for a couple is about $61,400. And they want to buy an electric car. They're going to use the electric car primarily around the city, perhaps to drive to work, to go to the grocery store, maybe go out someplace in the city on the weekend, maybe go to the movies, just around town. And they're going to drive their electric car about 10,000 miles a year. That's around 30 miles a day. So, they're not going to be big drivers. They're not going to drive very far at any one time, so they don't need a car like a Tesla Model 3 with the big battery that has a 350-mile range. They can get away with one of the less expensive electric cars that maybe has, around a 100-mile range. Well, there are, 4 or 5 electric cars available right now that are in that ballpark. They're less expensive, and they have, anywhere from about a 75 to 150-mile range. I've just kind of arbitrarily picked one car because this particular car has a gasoline equivalent that I can use for comparison. And that car is the Fiat 500e. The gasoline equivalent is the Fiat 500, which is basically the same car as the electric car, just with a gas engine. Now, this is not an endorsement of Fiat cars, although personally I think the Fiat 500 is kind of a cute little car. But I picked it largely because it's relatively low cost as electric cars go. So let's look at the cost, as well as a couple of other little details. How much does a Fiat 500e cost? Well, I went online, and the base model is about $33,000, manufacturer's suggested retail price. Now, when you go out to buy a car at a dealer, they may have some incentives. Maybe you pay a little less because of that, or you may want to stick some accessories on the car and you pay a little more. So I'm going to stick with a $33,000 cost for the car. You're probably going to pay some sales tax, and by the time we tax sales tax on there, we're looking at $34,500 maybe if you're paying, say, 7.5% sales tax. or somewhere in that range. And you're also going to have to register the car. So, we're up around 35,000, maybe a little more. Let's say 35.5 by the time we have bought the car, paid the sales tax and the title fee and all the other junk that is added onto it, and have driven away with it. Oh, wait a minute, Todd, you say? You've forgotten the federal tax credit. Well, no, I haven't. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. Well, how much does a Fiat 500 gas car cost? Well, the direct comparison is about $17,000. By the time you pay, tax, registration, and other dealer charges, you're probably looking at about $18,500. So it's going to cost you about $17,000 less than a Fiat 500e electric car. So that is, if you buy it and paid full price for it, that's money you're going to have to, from my point of view, recover in reduced operating costs, because electric cars do cost less per mile to drive. A Fiat 500e has a 24 kilowatt battery. So if you drive 10,000 miles a year and you get 81 miles per charge on your Fiat 500e, and you pay 15 cents a kilowatt for electricity, it's going to cost you around $500 a year to drive a Fiat 500e. How much will it cost to drive the gas version? Well, that depends on how much you pay for gas. If you're paying $2.50 a gallon, it's going to cost you about $850 a year for gas to drive that 10,000 miles. And if you pay $5 a gallon, it's going to cost you about $1,700 a year. So if we look at the $500 cost to drive the electric car, at $2.50 a gallon, we're saving about $350 a year to drive the electric car. So the payback time is the difference in price between the gas and electric cars divided by the cost saving to drive the electric car. And if we do that calculation for $2.50 a gallon gas, the payback time is 47.5 years. Now, chances are you're not going to keep your electric Fiat that long. I'd say the chance is 100%. Unless you are a car collector and drive it and then put it in your big garage and just keep it there for 47.5 years. If you're paying $5 a gallon for gas, the time to recover the price difference is a lot less. It's 14.5 years. So each individual has to make a decision. Is the extra upfront cost of an electric car for the time that you're likely to, amortized over the time you're likely to own it, worth the reduction in carbon footprint that driving an electric car gives you? Everybody has to make that decision for themselves, but certainly depending on how long you keep the car, you might be talking about, anywhere from $5,000 or $10,000 to, $15,000, $16,000. Is it worth it to you to drive an electric car? That's your decision you have to make. For me, the answer is no. Okay, what about if you get the tax credit? Well, tax credit's $7,500. That's going to reduce the break-even time quite a bit relative to the gas car. In fact, at $2.50 a gallon gas, it reduces the break-even time to a mere 27 years. Okay, you're not going to keep that electric car that long, so if you have cheap gas, you're going to have a significant cost of ownership that you're going to have to fork over to own the electric car, and you have to decide if it's worth it. $5 a gallon, the break-even time is only 8 years. That's possible. You might keep an electric car for 8 years and break even. And then you might actually be a little bit ahead of the game if you kept it for another couple of years before you bought a different car. That's a decision you have to make yourself. For me, if gas was $5 a gallon and I lived in a city, I would certainly consider buying an electric car if I had a place to charge it. That brings up another factor. You have to charge an electric car. Where are you going to do it? You need a charging station. That means you need an electric outlet. The chargers to charge these electric cars in a reasonable amount of time all need 240 volts right now. Sure, there are a few cars that you can charge off a 120 volt regular socket. 120 volt chargers aren't very effective in terms of how much power they put into the car and how much drivable mileage you recover per hour of charging. The numbers I found online were in the 3 to 5 miles of driving per hour of charging. So if you drive 30 miles a day and you only have a 120 volt socket to plug into, you're going to need to be plugged in probably in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 hours a day. But that means you need a place to plug in. If you own your own home or rent a house and can install a charging station, say in the garage or on the side of the house next to where you park the car, then you're probably in pretty good shape. And you can put in a 240 volt charging station. But charging stations aren't free. You're going to have to buy the charging station. When I looked online, they cost in the neighborhood of $500 to $600. And once you have the charging station, that's a 240 volt appliance, unless you're lucky enough to have a high amperage 240 volt plug on the outside of your house or in your garage, you're going to have one put in, which means you're going to have to hire an electrician to put in the dedicated circuit and install your charging station. That is probably going to cost you another $300 to $400, maybe $500, depends on how complicated it is in your particular location. So let's say $1,000 for your charging station. That's another cost you're going to have to recover. And it's going to add anywhere from about a year to 3 years to your cost recovery time on the vehicle. And it's also a big factor if you don't have a house where you can install a charging station. If you live in an apartment, if you have covered parking or indoor parking, you might get lucky and the apartment building may be set up for installation of charging stations for electric cars if you live in a relatively new place. If you live in an older building that predates electric cars, chances are the parking structure or the parking lot does not have the possibility of putting in a charging station. In that case, how are you going to charge an electric car? Well, you can take the electric car to a public charging station someplace and plug it in and leave it there. Maybe where you work you can do that. Maybe where you park the car when you go to work. There's electric car charging available. Maybe not. But that's going to be really inconvenient. And that's going to be an absolute requirement if you live in an apartment that doesn't have parking, that you have to park on street. You're not going to be able to charge the car at home. So that's a big factor. And to me, that says if you don't own a house or rent a house where the landlord will let you install a charging station, electric car really doesn't make sense. So what about that tax credit? Well, I looked into the tax credit, and that federal tax credit it's nice. It directly reduces your taxes. If you get a $7,500 tax credit, you reduce your taxes by $7,500. Woohoo! But that tax credit is non-refundable, which means that you can only use as much as of the tax credit as you pay in taxes. So if you pay $5,000 a year in taxes, you can only use $5,000 of the tax credit. What about the other $2,500? Can you use it the next year? No. The tax credit can't be carried forward to a future year if you had leftover tax credit. So basically, if you buy an electric car and get the tax credit, you only get as much tax credit as you have taxes. And you can't carry any unused tax credit forward. So if you pay $5,000 in taxes, the maximum tax credit you get is $5,000. The other $2,500 just goes away. You don't get any benefit from it. So what does that mean for average people? My average couple who makes $61,400, the current median income in the United States, will get an approximately $4,000 tax credit. The other $3,500 just evaporates for them. It's pretty easy to figure out how much of a tax credit you're going to get based on your income, particularly nowadays with the revised standard deduction, which basically means that most people are not going to itemize their deductions. And it also means that if you take the standard deduction, that is going to give you the maximum tax credit. And we can go through a quick calculation. This graph, which is a plot of tax credit on the vertical axis versus income in thousands of dollars on the horizontal axis, you can see that the tax credit maxes out at $7,500 for a single person at about $65,000 of income. For a couple, in order to get the full tax credit, you have to make almost $90,000. If you have additional deductions, for example, you have children, or you have deductions that allow you to itemize, your deductions are going to be higher than the standard deduction. That means your taxable income for a given income will be less, and your tax credit will also be less. So this is the maximum possible tax credit as a function of income. So you can see if you're, making in the $60K range as a couple, you're only going to get a $4,000 tax credit. If you make less, you get a smaller tax credit. And the tax credit goes to zero for a couple making $24,000. So basically the tax credit is a little bit unfair in that it favors the more affluent. The better off you are, the higher your income is, the more tax credit you get. Now, to me, it really bugged me when I worked this out that I was going to have to pay more for an electric car than somebody who makes more money than I do and pays more taxes. That just didn't seem right to me. I thought the tax credit should basically be a refundable tax credit, and if you buy an electric car, you get the full tax credit. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out that way. If you're trying to figure out how long before I break even in cost relative to buying the gas equivalent of this electric car, well, you have to figure out how much money you earn and how much of a tax credit you'll get. And if you make a lot of money, you get a better tax credit, makes the payback time a little less, and may make the electric car make more sense for you. So, let's see if I can answer the question I asked at the beginning. Does an electric car make sense in 2019? Well, given some of the considerations I've looked at, cost relative to a gas car, charging issues, say for living in a house versus living in an apartment, and the tax credit, I would say for most people who might be considering buying an electric car, financially it doesn't make sense, and certainly the charging issue, if you don't live in a house, may be a real barrier in terms of convenience. And that tax credit for somebody like me would be a real thorn in my side. So, for me, it certainly doesn't make sense, because I would always be thinking about that tax credit that I didn't get to take because I don't make enough money to get the full tax credit. And for my median couple, it probably doesn't make sense either, because unless their parents helped them out, chances are they don't have their own home. And, they probably live in an apartment, and charging may be an insurmountable barrier. So, that's where we are with electric cars in 2019. There's one other factor though, and that's getting away from using fossil fuels. That may be important enough to you to offset the extra cost of an electric car, and if you don't live in your own home, if you live in an apartment, it may also offset the inconvenience of charging your electric car. Well, if that's you, great. If it isn't you, well, then probably an electric car is not a good idea and doesn't make sense for you in 2019. I hope my arguments, make some sense to you. And bear in mind, I have nothing against electric cars. I think they're great. I just don't think right now that they make sense. So, thanks a lot for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and don't forget to click the notification button. Thanks again for watching my video.